I am really excited about this next artist talk. This is Sougwen Chung, who I've just sort of met and followed through the internet for a while. She has a lot of really amazing things. One of my most favorite projects of yours is drawing with Doug. Sougwen draws a lot with like this robot cohort, I would say, and you both feed off of each other's gestures. It's really fantastic. Anyway, without further ado, Sougwen.
Thanks. Oh, hi guys. How are you doing today? Good. Yeah, so I draw with this robotic arm named Doug, which I will make more sense in a little bit. Oh yeah. Yeah, so that'll all make more sense because otherwise it sounds pretty bizarre. But I'll get started. So yeah, just first, thanks for coming and hearing my artist talk, and Caroline for inviting me here. I have been speaking a lot actually this year, and I think sometimes talking about this kind of work, I'm sure like the other speakers would have this similar sentiment. It's kind of tricky because it occupies this particular niche, and here I feel like people are engaged in like art and technology, sort of share this common language. So I'm pretty excited whenever I get to share the work. So I'm really fascinated by communities like this and what they represent. To me, they represent invention, and that means whether we're here as artists or technologists or designers or engineers or startups, we're creating this shared space of people who are, showing work but also inventing a practice and a model and an idea, and everyone here is part of a community that supports that. So I think that's incredibly interesting. My name's Sougwen. Today I want to talk a little bit about some of my work, share some stories. I'm pretty nonlinear, and I don't know if you can already tell, but yeah, linearity is not my strong suit, but I'll try to get through this and have it make some sort of sense. I'm an artist and researcher working in the intersection of art and technology, like many of the sort of other speakers here today. I divide my time between the New Museum's Art and Technology Incubator, New Inc., and the Social Computing Group at MIT in Cambridge, which means I'm on the bus a lot, and that's terrible. But but first, a story. I was recently following this story about Lee Sedol. Have you guys been following this particular piece? Anyway, Lee Sedol is this brave human that faced off with AlphaGo, a computer program designed by Google in 5 historic matches. It was pretty riveting to see how the kind of competition and tournament unfolded. On a personal note, Go is a game that my whole family plays, and for as long as I can remember, it struck me as being really complicated and kind of uniquely intuitive. For the uninitiated, the game YK is or Go, as it is more commonly known, is an abstract strategy board game for 2 players. It's ancient and originated in China about 2,500 years ago. And so in this sort of recent tournament, Lee Sedol is facing off with AlphaGo, and spoiler alert, Lee Sedol lost 4-1. And I don't think I was like the only one in being a bit uncomfortable when all this happened. Because this development comes 10 times sooner than AI researchers anticipated. But here's the twist that I thought was kind of inspiring and fascinating. The top Go players in the world, Lee Sedol included, have said that after months of playing with this system, which is how it learns, how AlphaGo learns from the human players, they see the game completely differently. Because of how the system learns from the human players, it functions as kind of this intelligent behavioral mirror that learns alongside who it's playing. And I apologize to all the machine learning researchers in the room if that seems like a really crude explanation. But I particularly liked how this writer, Cade Metz from Wired, wrote about this event and how it signaled a particular cultural shift. He said that these exercises no longer demonstrate the idea of human versus machine, but human and machine. And that's been stuck in my mind, and bear with me, but it's not human versus machine. It's this idea of human and machine. And I think it's a pretty concise way of articulating this rare point of history we're in. It's really evocative, and it captures all the potential inspiration and anxiety that might flow from that dichotomy of human and machine. And I'm just personally really fascinated by this because for my practice, I've been exploring on different levels the tensions and trials and tribulations of what I've been calling the mark made by hand versus the mark made by machine. So I want to share some projects of mine that explore those two ideas, but even more of a rant. I think human versus machine, or human and machine, is definitely a framing, and as a narrative construct, it's like totally epic. As a narrative, I think it produces the same sensation we experience, in my opinion, from like looking up at like space or looking up at stars in the sky, images of space. It makes humans as a species feel really kind of insignificant, and by extensions, our sort of social anxieties and worries get put into a particular framework. And I think there's a real liberation there, and like the challenge to define what the human agent is becomes part of what I think is really interesting about this framing. So, end rant. So as I've been thinking about what humans actually do, I think, we sing and we dance, and I mean, I should never sing personally, but it's really terrible actually. And my dad's an opera singer, so he's like, just don't even try. But so I don't do that, but I draw a lot, and I think our ancestors drew as one of the earliest expressions of art in recorded history. So I think there's something intrinsic about it. I draw, and it's been kind of an obsession of mine for some time. I never know what I'm going to draw, but good or bad, I just know I need to do it. To borrow a bit from the Fluxus Manifesto for a moment, for me, the output of drawing is immaterial compared to the inhabitants of the state of drawing. And it's really about being in that flow state, which is how I sort of define my human agency, as it were. So yeah, I was curious in the beginning of my career to explore how software can augment, recontextualize, and subvert these creative processes and these flow states. That led me to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Geneva a few years ago. Feels like actually a lifetime ago, but it wasn't that long ago. Anyway, I've been making these small drawing sculptures on my studio wall to play around with form and light and shadow, really simple material fixations. Then suddenly this curator got in touch because I think he saw one of my images on like Instagram or something, which is absurd. And then I found myself carrying 20 massive hand-cut drawings and 20 soldered LED lights, and a suitcase full of metal supports through airport security from New York to London to Geneva for my first large installation. I don't know how I actually got on the plane, but it was pretty kind of epic. So I arrived in Geneva kind of harried and wild and got to work. At that point, I was a team of one meticulously crafting this bespoke paper drawing space. The installation combined layers of light and paper sculpture and sound in this massive room. I went from the frame of a drawing, contextualized in the frame of social media, to back into this physical space without perimeter. And in chiaroscuro, the viewer could escape into this surrealistic world of textural form created entirely from imagination. And here's a little bit of the video for it. With this piece, I wanted to create an environment of organic line, sound, and scale at a scale that enveloped you. What I didn't know it would be this kind of weird aha moment for me in my practice, where the materials that I was using entirely changed the scope of what I thought was possible. And on opening night, I decided to step into the frame of the installation space and finish the line work as sort of people were watching. Not because it wasn't finished, but I wanted to suggest the notion of incompleteness in the territory for myself and the audience. Yeah, so that's that. Anyway, when drawing in this installation, the power and potency of gesture became really apparent. I became really curious about creating a new environment in which performed gesture controlled everything in a site-specific space. So my next installation is called Ectasis. Ecdysis is a piece experimenting with the potential of performative architecture. So it's a 20-minute piece in which a performer, myself, plays and improvises lines of violin from which visual line work then flows. A simple pluck of a string as an effector, and a tensile vibrato manipulating the light casting on this large-scale tensegrity sculpture. So at the time, I've been reading a lot of Andy Clark's writings on cognitive extension through gesture, and I want to channel that as kind of the spontaneous energy of a violin performance. I've been told it's a little bit Burning Man, which I'm not sure how I feel about, but or like kind of sci-fi. The projector, the light on the tensegrity sculptures designed by Buckminster Fuller ended up looking really pixelated, so that also kind of blurred this line between just like stepping into an old video game in a way. So a lot of the textures also colored what this piece ended up being. But yeah, anyway, so using the stylus and the violin as a tool in performance dramatically changed my perspective towards software, and in particular towards interface and established design patterns. So one of my favorite things about like checking out all these talks we have online and going to conferences like this is discovering how other people find their inspiration. For me, I came across this quotation from a British curator named Emma Dexter. As the pencil moves about the paper, its path is local and confined. Freed from the need to consider the totality, it can respond immediately to where the hand is now in presentia. So that quote really got stuck in my mind, like a song like I couldn't get out of my head. So I thought, like, what if our digital tools could feel as natural and as uninhibited as drawing? I don't know if any of you are software geeks here, but it tends to, the interface element tends to be pretty, I think, inhibitive in a way. So, so freed from the need to consider the totality or the user flow of the interface, I wanted to try designing something that seemed less directed and more meditative, which led me to this project of mine called Presentia. Not the, I just kind of ripped Emma Dexter off, that's fine. Presentia is a really simple drawing tool that allows anyone to create 3D printable sculptures shaped entirely by the expressive gesture. So the tool aims to capture the meditative aspect of drawing and gesture that's stifled in a lot of digital tools. I don't know if you've tried messing with like Maya or Cinema 4D, or even Photoshop has these really rigid parameters, and I wanted it to kind of be more free-flowing. The project was a little bit of an experiment, but the aim of it is to open up engagement with 3D printing to everyone. I don't think, I don't think my mother is particularly interested in learning how to use, like Maya, but I think if you can draw, you can sort of engage in this narrative of 3D printing in this tool. And I think I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm the strongest coder out there, and sometimes I find software and hardware a bit, sort of stifling, but with this background and interest in interface and new mediums and its effects, I spent a long time with this idea that human intuition and working with coder technology were somehow at polar ends of the spectrum. Quite broadly, humans and machines were always sort of very opposite and very divided. The etymological origins of the word computer, after all, is that it's a computational system meant to produce automation. But to bring you back to our buddy Lee and AlphaGo, I think that's maybe shifting. Perhaps what we can learn from that story and other advances in AI is that, things are starting to take on a different color and a different effect. So now when I think of artificial intelligence and strides in deep learning, I think of the Chinese translation for the word computer, which translates directly to Din Lo, electric brain, which is a lot more imaginative and compelling than a system that produces automation. That's pretty standard, but what is an electric brain? So in 1964, Philip K. Dick asked if androids dreamt of electric sheep. I think in 2016 we might actually get to find out. I like that little clever framing. While just in its initial stages, I don't know if you guys have checked out a lot of the sort of deep learning algorithms, but it's approaching on what we could start to say is the visual imagination of artificial intelligence. It's a project that uses thousands of reference images, a catalog of the world's images. Apparently, there's a lot of dogs and weird eyes and stuff. But we can look through the lens of image recognition software as the program tries to understand what's being seen and translates that information back to us. This is an experiment by Johan Nordberg putting a simple noise pattern through the Deep Dream code. You can sort of start to see the code recognize different, or like imagine different visual elements. It's been said to look a little bit like computer vision on LSD, maybe that's where the deep part comes from. But when when the image data is the work of different artists, for instance, it becomes a way to replicate aspects of our iconic art throughout the ages. The image on the left is the original painting, and the two images on the right are the algorithm understanding what the style is and sort of reinterpreting certain images based on what that style is. So that's this StyleNet project, this exploratory work by a really great artist called Kyle McDonald. It can detect patterns from the artwork of different artists and then translate those patterns onto any image. Some work better than others, but I think it represents a new way of understanding the artist's hand and understanding artists of the past. And then there's projects like sort of Deep Chat, which is what I'm calling it. It's this project called Xiaoxi from China. It's a teenage girl simulation, a conversation partner. This is the chatbot's official avatar. It's developed by Microsoft, and it's becoming sweepingly popular with its user base in China, with over like 1.5 million chat group invitations in the first 72 hours. This is a transcript of journalist Liu Jun's first conversation with this chatbot, which I think was also kind of strangely poetic. The program is both evasive and evocative. When asked, "What is the happiest thing in your life?" The bot answers, "Being alive." And I thought it was kind of a goth Chinese teenager simulation, which I love. So we're used to seeing robots in various contexts. That's kind of the mind portion, but I've been thinking also about the form and the body. Sometimes these robots are cogs on an assembly line. Sometimes they're kind of instruments of war. And sometimes they operate as, transportation for our cats. I really just have this slide here because I have a lot of cats on Roomba's GIFs on my computer, and I wanted them to have some sort of use. I have some falcons later for you, too. But our curiosity for robots seems infinite, and the field of robotics, obviously, is evolving rapidly, as is our interactions with machines as a whole. So this I love. I showed a little bit before, but this is a biomimetic anthropomorphic robot hand developed by Ji Yu at Grab Lab at Yale University. Not only can it mimic the human hand with alarming accuracy, it's poised to eventually be controlled by brainwaves, which is kind of the ultimate prosthetic. This is Atlas. It's a high mobility humanoid robot designed to navigate outdoor terrain, developed by Boston Dynamics. And this is Wildcat, the aptly named robot also developed by Boston Dynamics, which is a free-running quadruped robot that will reach 50 miles per hour over rough terrain. That's definitely something you want to see, like, in your neighborhood, right? So most of the people, and this is kind of in pop culture too, I think. People are, I think, really entertained by looking at these videos. And I think even my friends who are not in this niche of ours shared this and just kept on saying like how terrifying it was. And it kind of is, right? And if it is slightly terrifying to you, you can be rest assured that at least the team developing these new robots have a sense of humor about it. So if you go to Boston Dynamics' YouTube page, they have all these like parody robot videos, and I don't know how I feel about it, but I watch it like a lot, So those are just a few examples of what's to come. New robots are being developed for new purposes every day. And it stands to reason that the competition, this human versus machine thing, humans and robots competing for physical intellect and strength, we're probably not going to be at the front of the pack. I think there's a consensus around that. And while there's been some dispute of this, let's assume for the purposes of my rambling artist talk that this future is inevitable. And then there's sort of what artists are doing in that space. In art school, I remember encountering the works of German minimalist artist Sougwen. He's kind of a crowd pleaser. His most famous pieces are operational diagrams, like this, which on a wall surface, any continuous stretch of wall, using a hard pencil, place 50 points at random. The points should be evenly distributed over the area of the wall, and all of the points should be connected by straight lines. Usually it's a huge hit with coders, right? These are really instructions for others to execute. I always thought in its procedural nature, it really reminded me of lines of code. And because it follows a very computational language, it's a bit of a statement on eliminating the self-expression of humans in an artwork. So that brings us to today, finally. Today, I'd want to talk to you about the Drawing with Doug. Today, I'd like to talk to you about my project, Drawing Operations Unit Generation 1, which is where the whole Doug thing comes from. Get it? Drawing Operations. Drawing Operations is an improvisational drawing collaboration between me and a robotic arm, whom I've named Doug, because that's funny, I think. I've worked with some pretty eccentric characters, but Doug is by far my strangest collaborator to date. Together we've performed in New York and in Tokyo and in Austin. I get really nervous with these drawing performances, but he did great, totally kept his servos cool, didn't break a sweat. That's the cheesiest robot joke I will tell today. And that's always the statement that gets more laughs, which I think is funny. Anyway, so for Drawing Operations, I want to flip the Lewitz original script on its head. Instead of humans following mechanical or computational operations, I wanted to try something different. I want to experiment with machines following human drawing operations. It's a really initial experiment into a new foray into engaging a machine as an artistic collaborator. And it's also a way to participate in a narrative around machine learning within the space of a creative practice. And when we were testing this out the first time, I saw like Doug moving. It was like seeing a kid take its first steps. It was pretty strange. So along with my friend Yotem, we designed the behavior of this strange new collaborator. First, we needed to get it to move. Well, we uploaded noise patterns into its Arduino brain and kind of let it work its magic. Secondly, we needed to get Doug to see. With the use of a simple web camera, the robot tracks the movement of my mark via simple color tracking. Seeing Eye Doug, we call him. And thirdly, we programmed the robot to follow. Using a computer vision library called JIT, the robot can recognize the motion of my line and mimic the gesture in real time on paper as we draw together. So these are some of the drawings we just sort of started experimenting with. The project is an experiment in gestural empathy, a performance of follow the leader, like for machine and human, I guess, and an introduction of the intuitive language of gesture to a machine with the aim of showing artistic co-creation. Not human versus machine, but in Generation 1, human and machine drawing together. In Generation 2, which is what I'm working on now and really excited about, I'll be exploring the space of shared memory. Not only will Doug be able to remember the drawing gestures we've done together in the studio and in performance spaces, I'm going to be collecting the drawing styles of other people and other artists. And by collecting these drawing styles of artists and non-artists alike, we're going to be in effect building a brain of drawing behaviors unique to the robotic arm. Unique to Doug, but available to everyone. We're going to open source the project, and people are going to be able to kind of have their own robotic collaborations. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I just hope robotic arms don't start punching like people everywhere, because that's a danger if you're working with robots. Generation 2 will be fully open source, and I think it'll be interesting to see how we learn as a collective to draw with these machines. So I found this pretty surprising. In many of my projects, perfection was always the goal, about finding like the perfect line or the perfect interaction. But the most surprising thing I've learned from this collaboration is this: when a human and a robot can create together, the inaccuracies become part of the improvisation, and it's definitely not a bug when there's an error or glitch. It really becomes a feature of the project. And I thought that was something that actually has changed a lot of what I'm interested in my practice now. But anyway, I'll leave you with this. Moves that AlphaGo make are described as beautiful by Lee Sedol in the games that he's playing. I think you can see this sort of astonishment on his face. And I think this is just the beginning. Generation 1 Doug can move, see, and follow. In forthcoming generations, Doug will be able to remember, recall, and reflect drawings with me, and hopefully drawings with all of you. When that happens, I have no idea what he'll draw like, but I'm pretty curious to find out. Thanks.
That was a really fantastic talk, Sougwen.
Thanks.
Do we have any questions? Oh.
So, you called your drawing with the collaborative. How do you feel like what Doug was doing impacted your drawing?
Well, because Doug is kind of following my gesture, it becomes really interesting. Like I somehow find that because it's such a performance piece, there's the aim of creating this cohesive image together. So while I would start off the drawing with like a very kind of measured and like simple, smooth line, Doug's not able to, or the robotic arm is not able to really do that. So I need to adjust based on what the robotic arm is doing, which sort of creates this strange like distortion within, like an intuitive distortion on the page. So that becomes the collaborative aspect of it. I think because it's a drawing collaboration, it with the aim of creating an aesthetic object, it sort of gives a different sort of lens to these improvisations and inaccuracies. So in that way, it's a collaboration. For future generations of Doug, when Doug has a memory bank, it'll be more collaborative in that he'll be selecting from like established gestures or like memory gestures that we've made together. So it'll have a little bit more of its own agency, but very much agency defined by the gestures in his memory bank or library. So that's sort of where the project is right now.
In the back?
I was wondering, in some artistic collaborations, between the two artists, sometimes you feel like insecurity or frustration or happiness or synergy.
Yeah.
I was wondering what your relationship with Doug is kind of like when you're working with him. Do you ever get frustrated or like jealous or?
Tons of jealousy. Oh my God. Gets all the attention. No, that's an interesting question. And so just as even though my robot joke was really cheesy, I do think there's something really nerve-wracking about doing this performance in front of people with this robotic arm. I think it's really a feeling of unity because we're really in it together, and it's the response to it. So my feeling about drawing with a robotic arm is it creates this feeling of vulnerability in the collaboration because I need the camera tracking to work, but it really, in process, it really seems like trying to nurture this sort of robot that's learning what I'm doing. But what I found more interesting than that was when I do perform it in public, the response of the viewer is that of like such overwhelming anthropomorphism and empathy. They like really start to feel like they're watching something have its first emergent movement or thoughts or whatnot, and that's clearly not what's right now happening in on tech side. But that something as simple as a robotic arm with a pencil and like a human working with it can create this well of empathy. I think is really bizarre, and it becomes like a person. Like I did this initial experiment. I showed it at Red Bull Studios at this New Ink showcase, and people were writing about the robotic drawing like collaboration as Doug. like one of the writers was like, oh, I love Doug. I want Doug in my house. And I'm like, dude, it's just a robotic arm. But it's a nice characterization or a relationship that gets developed between the audience and this collaborator. Not me, but definitely the collaborator that that I think is I'm really interested in exploring further because I haven't seen that in different robotic drawing projects. Yeah.
I guess I actually have a slight question. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
I also have a mic. I work with AI and machine learning, and what I find actually really fascinating about Doug, and well, you were prefacing this with AlphaGo and how the AlphaGo players actually learned something so different and new about
Definitely.
the game from seeing the way like a machine broke it down into pieces, probably like queries, and the way that the machine was like learning.
Entirely. Yeah.
Do you see drawing differently when you see your movements mimicked and then distilled and then redone by Doug to you?
I mean, I don't. Well, there's the process, and then there's kind of the goal, right? I've always liked the idea of improvisation, but it was always about finding like this level of aesthetic. Like that's the whole like it's not a bug, it's a feature kind of thing. My I don't necessarily want to draw more like or like I don't want to start drawing noise patterns or whatnot, but I think there's something about the inaccuracy of the performance that really resonates with people that makes me sort of rethink the perfection of the line, which has kind of changed my whole perspective on what really people respond to and what I respond to as a drawer or sort of tentative performer, and that's been really interesting for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering, like, thinking about the army robot with the 4 legs, like, that doesn't have a head, which is kind of weird. And then thinking about, like, this robot, it keeps on being referred to, like, as an arm. But I'm wondering, like a head is, like, a really important thing, and a body is, like, a really important thing.
Right,
I'm
right.
wondering, like, how you feel working with something that, like, doesn't have a body.
Well-
or, like, where is that?
Well, the whole I think the whole like mark made by hand and mark made by machine. Like I guess in the project I kind of wish I didn't have a body doing it because it's really about just communicating through gesture. I think the reduction of these other elements really enhance what the project is. I'd love to work with a more human-like robot, but at the same time, I find there's this tendency for robotic design to mirror us and sort of mimic us visually, and I don't think that's what this project and its sort of opinion on artificial intelligence is trying to, or designed intelligence is trying to hit. I don't think it should be about necessarily replicating the physical form or the process of the human, but trying to develop something entirely new that's more suited to what machines could be, if that makes any sense.
So you mentioned that it's a collaboration to create an aesthetic object.
Right.
So what do you do with the drawings?
Right now, I'm collecting them as different experiments. I'm trying to see how they're evolving over time. Right now, I've just been sort of posting them and sharing them. I have some people who want to like collect them, but at the moment, it's more of a performance piece. But yeah, it's been cool to see it evolve. Like the drawings we were doing in New York and the drawings we were doing in Austin and Tokyo have all kind of, there's like some sort of visual shift that I don't yet understand. But it's, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing with them yet. Yeah.
How have you observed the way your drawings might transform or react or behave when you're drawing with Doug? Has that changed your practice?
Pardon?
Has that changed your drawing style or practice?
It's like I said, it's changed my approach to the performance or the aim of the drawing itself. Because right now the robot's really mimicking my movements. I think I've seen a lot of drawing robots, and for a while, Doug was pretty much doing different noise patterns and different kind of procedural, code-driven drawings. But I think because Doug is following my lead, it's not aesthetically, I'm not becoming more jittery necessarily, but visually it hasn't changed how I draw. More conceptually, it's changed how I draw, if that makes sense. Yeah.
In contrast to AlphaGo,
Yeah.
where its like learning objective is very concrete,
Mm-hmm.
win the game. For your next version of Doug, have you thought about how you want it to learn?
Yeah, I mean, right now, how I'd like it to learn. I'd like Doug to learn collaboratively. I think right now it's just a performance between or a interaction between me and him, or it or whatever. But I'd like it. I'd like Doug to be to have a memory bank of everyone else's drawings. I'd like it to be as intuitive or expressive as possible. I actually don't want to really break it down too much into a more automated or computational language. But we will have to sort of cap off how long the gesture will be. But it's kind of fascinating because just as Lee Sedol has learned new things about the game, in drawing with Doug right now, I'm learning a little bit about how I draw. But when we open up this library and open up this memory to other people, I think my hope is to learn more about drawing and gesture itself, and sort of the timing of it, and how aesthetics impact the creative process and the process of gesture. So that's sort of a long-winded way of exploring how it can learn in the future.
I guess thinking like in terms of how it would call back certain gestures to make it, like how would it define aesthetics? Would you try to program it in, or do you not explicitly say anything?
I think once we get the gestures, and once we grab the library, we'll be able to do more experimentation. I actually have no idea right now what would make the most sense. We also want to sort of parse different gestures from some of the StyleNet research. So not only will it be trying to get a memory bank of living artists, but also artists of the past. So it's funny because in this project, the goal will be to make an aesthetic object, but there's also going to be an aspect of judgment. Like I'm thinking about getting a friend, this amazing illustrator called Yuko Shimizu, to develop a drawing memory bank with Doug. So I think part of that assessment process and how we decide how the drawing is recreated in code or manifested in code will be like her judgment, like what drawing feels like a drawing that she would do, and by that assessment create the pattern by which Generation 2 Doug draws. It'll be a pretty subjective exploration, I think.
I'm kind of fascinated by the implications around identity for this like anthropomorphization that's happening with the robotic arm. Because like if I were to draw something in Maya or something like that, I wouldn't think that I was like collaborating with the software necessarily.
Right.
I'm like using it as a tool. So I'm wondering like where you think the line is. Is it because there's a physical like arm drawing with you? Is that why it becomes this like other, or is it like another limb of yours, like is an extension of you? Like how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I doing a little bit of so like the jump between like Maya to a robotic arm definitely has a physical component, but there's so even with other robotic drawing projects, there's Plotters is definitely a plotter, which is a different type of drawing robot. Definitely has it's much more accurate. It's more used in drawing projects, but I think what makes this more kind of anthropomorphic and more in that way humanizing is that it's a physical sort of mirroring of our drawing behaviors. So it really changes if it's a plotter. I always think like some plotter drawing robots are just shitty printers, and there's no one cares. At least I don't. But and that has existed for a really long time. Robotic drawing pieces have existed for a long time. I think the intrigue and why people resonate with this is not only is it sort of you can relate to the arm more. There's a human hand and a human arm and a robotic arm doing it together that creates this kind of strange anthropomorphic, mimicking relationship. So it's really, I think it's the physical characteristics for sure that make it, and the context in which it's presented that drives this idea a lot. Yeah.
I was just wondering, like you obviously have a lot of interest in the work from the fine arts and conceptual standpoint. Do you get a lot of interest in your work from the more like tech entrepreneur world? And if so, how does that interact?
Well, actually, surprisingly, I would say the tech and entrepreneurial world is much more engaged in the project than the fine art world or whatnot. And I think it's because while the technology for what I'm doing is not sophisticated at all, it's really part of this emerging or relevant sort of cultural moment we're in about how we decide we want to engage with machines and sort of what that relationship should be. Like, I think it touches a little bit on like, because it's a display of human agency and robotic agency, it can sort of touch on these like ideas of self-driving cars or like what the future and like chatbots, and there's all these. It sort of is situated a little bit loosely in all of that, but in general, I think the narrative that the tech entrepreneurial industry likes to explore now is this collaborative relationship, like this Geminoid type of relationship that is more about partnership and less about control or automation, which is how most tech conversations go, whether it's explicit or implicit. Cool. All right.
I think that's it. Great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.